The old man's hands were shaking so badly that the coins slipped from his fingers and scattered across the pharmacy counter, rolling in every direction like tiny, desperate apologies. He dropped to his knees to gather them, his cardigan sleeve dragging across the dirty floor, while behind him a line of customers watched in silence. And then the pharmacist's voice cracked through the store like a whip. "Sir, if you can't pay, you need to step aside. This isn't a charity." Nobody in that pharmacy could have guessed that within the next 10 minutes, a stranger's quiet act of dignity would bring a grown man to tears, expose a secret that had been buried for 60 years, and remind an entire town what it truly means to care for one another. If stories like this, stories about kindness, about second chances, about people who choose compassion when it costs them something, mean anything to you, please take a moment right now to like this video. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And subscribe to Kindness Corner so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's get back to Walter. Walter Higgins was 82 years old, and until 18 months ago, he had never once needed anyone's help. He'd worked 40 years at the same steel plant, raised 2 children who barely called anymore, and buried his wife Eleanor on a rainy Tuesday that he still remembered in exact aching detail. Since her passing, Walter's world had grown smaller and smaller, shrinking down to his small apartment, his aging dog Biscuit, and this pharmacy, the one place he visited every single month to pick up the heart medication that kept him alive. That morning, Walter had counted his money 3 times before leaving the house. His Social Security check was late again, some processing error the bank couldn't explain, and his savings had dwindled to almost nothing after Eleanor's medical bills years ago. He was short, not by much, just $11, but enough that when the pharmacist, a sharp-featured man named Derek Cole, ran the transaction and saw it decline, something ugly flickered across his face. "It's just $11, Walter whispered, his voice trembling with the particular shame that only the elderly poor truly understand. The shame of having worked an entire life and still coming up short. "I get my check in 2 days, I promise. I've been coming here for 6 years, you know me." But Derek didn't want to know him. Derek was having a terrible week. His manager had written him up over inventory numbers. His own bills were piling up, and somewhere in his exhaustion and resentment, he decided this old man in front of him was an easy target for the anger. He couldn't direct anywhere else. "Rules are rules," he snapped, loud enough for the whole store to hear. "I can't just give away medication because someone feels sorry for themselves. Maybe budget better next time." The words landed like slaps. A few customers in line shifted uncomfortably, looking away the way people do when they want to help, but don't know how, or worse, when they've simply trained themselves not to get involved. That was when Walter's wallet slipped from his shaking hands, spilling coins and old photographs across the counter, including one faded picture of Eleanor, young and laughing, from a summer 50 years gone. He knelt down, his knees cracking audibly, fumbling to gather the pieces of his life scattered on a dirty pharmacy floor, while a line of strangers watched and did nothing, except one. Maya Thompson had walked into that pharmacy for something ordinary, a refill of her son's asthma inhaler, and had been standing 3 people back in line, phone in hand, half distracted. When she heard the pharmacist's tone shift from professional to cruel, Maya was a corporate attorney, sharp-suited, and normally guarded, someone who had spent 15 years building walls thick enough to survive rooms full of powerful men who underestimated her. But something about watching an old man kneel on a filthy floor, scrambling for spilled coins while a healthy young pharmacist sneered down at him, cracked something open in her chest that she hadn't expected. She stepped out of line. She didn't raise her voice. She simply walked to the counter, placed her hand gently but firmly in the air between Derek and Walter, a gesture that somehow silenced the entire pharmacy, and said, with a steadiness that surprised even her, that she would be covering the difference, and that from this moment forward, Derek needed to remember he was speaking to a human being, not an inconvenience. Derek opened his mouth to argue, some reflexive defense about policy and procedure. But Maya wasn't finished. She reached into her own purse, pulled out her card, and paid not just the $11 Walter owed, but his entire prescription in full. Then she knelt down beside him, this stranger, in an expensive blazer, kneeling on a pharmacy floor beside a trembling old man in a worn gray cardigan, and helped him gather his photographs. his coins, the small fragments of dignity that had been scattered across the tile. It was in that moment, as Maya handed Walter the faded photograph of Eleanor, that she noticed his hands weren't just shaking from age or embarrassment. They were shaking because he hadn't eaten a proper meal in 2 days, saving every dollar for this medication that kept his heart beating. When she asked him gently, quietly, when he had last had a real meal, Walter's composure finally broke, and right there in the pharmacy, this proud old man who had never asked anyone for anything in 60 years wept into his own hands. What happened over the following weeks became something the whole town still talks about. Maya didn't simply pay for one prescription and walk away feeling good about herself. She came back. She learned Walter's name, learned about Eleanor, learned about Biscuit waiting at home, and learned that Walter had been quietly starving himself to afford medicine that should never have cost this much in the first place. She connected him with a senior assistance program that covered his prescriptions permanently. She organized a small meal delivery service through her church that ensured Walter never faced an empty refrigerator again. And she did something else. Something that mattered more than any single dollar amount. She visited him. Every single week. Not out of obligation, but because somewhere in that pharmacy, she had recognized her own grandfather in Walter's trembling hands. A man who had also once been made to feel small for simply growing old. As for Derek, the story spread through the town faster than he could have imagined, and it forced him to confront something uncomfortable about himself, that his own stress and bitterness had turned him into someone capable of humiliating a defenseless old man. Weeks later, he found Walter and offered an apology that was, for the first time in the whole encounter, entirely genuine. Walter, being the kind of man Eleanor had spent her whole life loving, forgave him without hesitation, because that is simply who Walter was. If this story touched something in you today, if it reminded you that one small act of courage can restore someone's dignity, that kindness costs us little, but means everything to the person receiving it, please don't scroll past without letting us know. Like this video, share it with someone who needs reminding that goodness still exists, and subscribe to Kindness Corner, so these stories keep finding you. And before you go, we have one small request in the comments below. Tell us the name of someone in your life who has shown you unexpected kindness when you needed it most. We read every single one, and we'd love to know yours. Walter still visits that pharmacy every month. Only now, he walks in with his head held high, Biscuit's leash in one hand, and a friend named Maya waiting just outside to walk him home.